Hello, welcome to the May UN Info session. My name is Amanda Lowry, and I am with the San Diego chapter of the United Nations Association. The San Diego chapter was established in 1946 and promotes engagement with the United Nations by translating global initiatives into a local context through education, advocacy, and other programs. You can learn more about these programs and what we do on our website, unasd.org, and where you can also view our previous UN Info sessions there or on our YouTube channel. Today, we'll be talking with one of our board members of the UNA USA San Diego chapter, Chida Warren Darby, who is also the Deputy Director of Communications for the City of San Diego's Mayor Todd Gloria. Chida has immense experience in journalism and communications. As May 3rd is declared the World Press Freedom Day by the United Nations, we are honored to host Chida to discuss the importance of journalism and how the press is imperative for the public good. Chida is also the editor-in-chief of Blackened Magazine, which is a premier digital Black lifestyle publication catering to the 22 to 44-year-old African-American demographic. She is also a media and marketing consultant through her business, Rebecca and Company. Her involvement in journalism began with her family business, the San Diego Voice and Viewpoint newspaper, which serves as the city's oldest and largest African-American publication and has been around for nearly 60 years, where she did serve as co-publisher and managing editor. Chida ultimately strives to build awareness of racial injustice and community injustice through her faith, journalism, and commitment to fairly and accurately represent marginalized communities in the light of local issues. She uses freedom of the press to educate those in her community on local conditions, seeking to teach others the power of pen and paper and the magnitude of embracing one's true story, utilizing liberties allowed by freedom of the press. Wow, amazing. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you so much, Chida, for taking time out of your busy schedule. The first question that I would like to ask you is about your thoughts on misinformation and disinformation. We especially see misinformation and disinformation taking place on the internet through social media, and would love to know some ways that we can overcome media filtering challenges, such as when a journalist or a media outlet actually has the opportunity to choose the information they like to share. It actually impacts the context and meaning of the final story that is published. So what are your thoughts on that?
That's such an important point, and thank you for having me. This is such an important conversation to have. I really feel like nowadays, readers have to do a lot more work to get to the truth of the matter. I personally look at several different media outlets, for context in the story. A lot of times you can trace stories back to, their origin. You can go back a few articles. And even if the story is a new story coming out, you can kind of connect it to another story somewhere else. And so, we really have to put in the work as readers to just really be informed. Don't only rely on social media. Those things are spliced and cut and created sometimes to fit a narrative to draw readers and to get views. But we can't be lazy in our reading. We have to be advocates for the truth, and we have to do our homework and not take things at face value. Do your homework. Yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. And with that being said, could you share a little bit about the importance of continuing to read and support print media, especially on the local level?
Absolutely. One thing I like to tell people is that print media is a legal and a historical document. So it's not going anywhere. There's this misconception that the internet is just going to take over print publications and they're going to all disappear and die. They're not. One thing I like to note is when you see billionaires that have no background in publishing and journalism purchasing newspapers, there should be something to be said about that. So you have to keep, supporting local media outlets. They cover the issues that are important at the local level. A lot of times we see a lot of national coverage, and maybe if something's really big in our city, it'll make national news, but there's so many stories to be told in our communities, and we are trusting our community outlets to tell those stories. And so that's where you can get really the meat and bones of the city and the community through our local community papers.
Great, thank you so much. And how does journalism hold entities accountable, like companies, local government, community organizations? And in addition to that, part two of the question is, what are some ways that we as civil society can hold journalists accountable for writing on topics that are important for us and the public good in general?
Yeah, great question. So journalists can hold, these big entities and corporations accountable by kind of being the watchdog and looking for things and kind of just being guardians of the city, if you will, watching trends, watching things that may not seem right, and then asking the questions and then doing the homework to uncover the truth. And then once that truth is discovered, or, there's something that needs to be shared, putting that information out for the public to read and learn more about. And then I think in that process starts this engagement, this kind of dance between journalists and civilians, if you will, the public, this back and forth of kind of unearthing what the truth of the matter is. And so it's a cycle. Journalists need readers and readers need journalists. And in that, as readers discover what's being put out, from a news standpoint, they can now ask questions, and they can also support the efforts of the journalists to hold government and organizations and big corporate entities accountable, because now there are questions that are being asked. And, if you have enough people asking the questions and enough headlines being put out about them, somebody's going to have to answer sooner than later. So, yeah.
Thank you. This year's World Press Freedom Day theme is information as a public good, which is an announcement about how journalism is truly a public good and looking at ways that we can strengthen the production, distribution, and reception of content to really advance transparency and empowerment while leaving no one behind. So with that being said, a lot of your work has been around this concept. And so what does it mean now for you that you are the Deputy Director of Communications for the City of San Diego?
That's a great question. I really had to kind of figure out what that meant. The beautiful thing about my role is that I believe our mayor wants to do something different that hasn't been done historically from a communication standpoint. And so it's finding ways to make government palatable for the public, and something that they need to understand. And so, with my background in journalism and my hat in that world, I bring that same notion over into this role where, I'm really adamant about still advocating for the people needing to understand what's happening. And I love that I have that perspective, because even in this capacity, I still feel like I'm a servant of the people in the community. And so it's really a blessing. I feel like there's just people tapping me on my shoulder, as I'm writing or doing things. There's certain questions that I need to ask to make sure we're being held accountable, and that we're being transparent, and we're presenting the information necessary so that voters that, elected those in office can be informed and make the right decisions and choices.
So do you think the media is doing enough to talk about the Sustainable Development Goals in our local context? And if so, what would you like to see from civil society in order to have a call to action about that?
I think the media is doing what they can. The interesting thing about media these days is that there's so many different niche publications and pockets where people can go to get their information. I think that could be a little frustrating, because if that's not something you're following or into, you may miss it in the grand scheme of things. And so my desire would be that those things that are important, like what you mentioned, need to be presented in such a way where people won't just kind of pass over the headline or the content, that there will be a connection between the content and the actual people. And, those on the other side of the fence that aren't journalists, that have to keep the journalists, accountable and committed to writing about the content, need to keep those issues before them and say, hey, I didn't see this in there, or do more engagement by even contributing, being on commentators, writing op-eds and submitting that content to those publications so that information can get shared, and maybe even spark some interest from a publisher standpoint, that there is interest from the civil society about what's going on. And if these submissions are coming in, maybe this is something we need to cover more of.
So the next question I have for you is, if you have any suggestions based on your work in publishing and, on the other side of advocating, what suggestions do you have for civil society to reach out to publications and even the City of San Diego to talk about issues that are important to them?
Great question. I think civil society needs to know that the inquiries do go somewhere. Sometimes there's this idea that, I'm not going to send an email or write a letter. Nobody's going to get it. Nobody's going to read it. You have to hold media outlets accountable, politicians, everyone. And so we have a lot of great ways that people can reach out to these different entities, whether it's a Facebook message, Instagram message, whether it's an email, whether it's a handwritten letter. You have to just take that shot, take that risk. And if you feel like one isn't enough, then pull a few people together and send 10, 15, or 20 letters. Somebody's going to get one of those letters, and express your concerns and demand that, some eyes are put on it and that it's addressed. And that's really the way to start, is put it in writing. It can be tracked, it can be traced, and you can kind of build a record from there about your concerns.
Great, thank you. And a brief follow-up is, with social media, do you think that it makes it easier for civil society to reach out to these entities?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we use it here in the office. Mayor's has different platforms that he uses to engage with the public, and people are very active in sending messages, and it helps. It gets the message to our office relatively quick. And so I don't think one medium is necessarily better than the other. I'm a little partial to print because print is forever, and handwritten letters, unless they're burned or destroyed, that's it. But I'm just a big advocate of making sure things are documented and traced. And you can have some glitches at times with electronic methods, but you want to make sure that what you're sending, even certified mail, that still works. Confirming receipt, having a signature required, all those things matter. So, yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing. And do you have any last words that you'd like to share about World Press Freedom Day, or how important press freedom is for you and for City of San Diego?
Yeah, I'm just excited that we even have World Press Freedom Day. I would just ask people to keep supporting media, keep reading, keep listening. I'm a big NPR fan. I love listening to news radio, and continue to stay informed, and make sure you diversify what your intake is, and see things from different perspectives. And I think that's important, to have a full, holistic understanding of what's happening in our world, and even reading things internationally. I mean, I think that's a great thing. And we have a lot of advantages in our nation because we have the freedom of the press that a lot of other countries don't have. And just from my experience, for instance, being in Africa and Morocco, like, they have a lot of limitations that we don't have here. And so I think there's some things we take for granted, but we definitely should stop taking them for granted, and take advantage of these opportunities to have access to information.
Great. Thank you so much. I so appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and to talk about such an important topic. So thank you again, Chida, for holding such an important conversation. And I do have a brief presentation to share about the Sustainable Development Goals and why they are important to us. I also have a few of the Sustainable Development Goals that really resonate with World Press Freedom Day, the work that you have done and will do for the City of San Diego's Mayor Todd Gloria. So the SDGs were created in 2015 and are supported by all UN member states for the 2030 Agenda for the Sustainable Development Initiative. As I discuss a few of the SDGs, I've actually included an actionable step that you can take at home to help reach the Sustainable Development Goals. So our first one is SDG 4, Quality Education, which is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. And something that you can do here to support this goal is to find a local organization to volunteer with, to either tutor children, adolescents, or adults to work on their language skills. I also included SDG 8, Decent Work and Economic Growth, which is to promote sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. And one thing that you can do here is to recognize that journalism works to keep companies and organizations accountable in the context, especially of corporate responsibility. So I encourage you to continue to stay up to date with reports on corporate social responsibility, diversity inclusion efforts, and sustainability practices. Use your purchasing power to support companies who are behaving responsibly. And then SDG 10, reduce inequalities. Reduce inequality within and among countries. So take a moment to financially support and read independent and BIPOC journalists and print media, especially in your community. And SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions, to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. One thing you can do here is to use your civic freedoms, and I encourage you to make your voice heard and vote in all elections. And then lastly, SDG 17, partnerships for the goals. Friends, family, coworkers, and those in your community to get involved in these initiatives and to help further the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. And with that being said, I would like to thank you again for participating in such an important discussion, and would like to encourage our community to join our UN monthly info sessions, where we host local businesses, nonprofits, grassroots organizations, and leaders in San Diego County that work to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you. I enjoyed being with you today.